welcome back to our Quran summary sessions again. I hope that you all are well and taking full benefit from these last few left blessed days and powerful nights. Speaking is one thing, but than any nights of the year. So I hope and pray that we all take full benefit from it. And what best way than spend some time during the day with our summarizing the surahs, and then hoping that we can do in-depth study this year, inshallah. We've got quite a few surahs to cover today, and to present them, inshallah, we have our lovely sister Samar Haq. And those of you who have been in this beautiful journey since the first day, if you remember that Samar started with Fatiha, and she explained Surah Al-Baqarah to us. Assalamu alaikum, Samar.
Assalam.
I thought nobody heard me, so I was worried. How are you?
I'm good, alhamdulillah. And how are you?
Can't hear you very well.
Let me just have a quick look. Is that better? Let me have a look. Is that better?
Sabah, your voice is breaking too.
Yes, Sabanti's voice is breaking. Wondering, is my voice okay?
Those who have started, so
I'm just saying because your voice is breaking. I'm wondering if that.
Well, let you speak now because I don't need to speak.
Hello.
Yes, Samar, I can hear you.
So is my voice okay? And I think it might be connection from Sister Saba's side.
Yeah, I think your voice is okay at the moment, so you can go. Yeah.
Okay, I think I'll make a start, inshallah. If that's okay. We've got quite a bit to cover, so I don't want to spend too much time discussing internet connections at the moment. But yeah, if you guys can just let me know if my internet connection at any stage is slightly unstable, inshallah. Okay, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني ويفقهوا قولي ربي زدني علما ربي زدني علما ربي زدني علما. So like Sister Saba said just at the start, we've got a plethora of surahs we're going to be covering. You'll see me today, inshallah, and tomorrow. Inshallah, whatever we have not been able to cover today, it will be spilled over to tomorrow's session. But we're going to try and do this in the most a logical way possible. I'm just going to describe to you the structure of the next 2 days. So the way that I've organized this, firstly, if you're writing notes, I will not be going in chronological order. And the reason for that is a lot of these surahs, you may have recognized that we're going to cover about half of just 26, 27, 28, and about half of, about half of 29. So that's a lot, and a lot of surahs that encompass it. So for the sake of ease of access and understanding and summarizing, I have grouped surahs that are in each of these juz, and I've put them together. So they are not necessarily in chronological order. So if you're writing notes, maybe find a way, maybe either follow my structure in my themes that I've done, or perhaps follow a structure that suits you, or so on and so forth. And I will let you know what themes we are covering. Like I have in my first slide, you guys can see here, I'll be covering 3 main areas, inshallah, today. So today we're going to be looking at relationships, and the surahs that I'm going to be covering each of these. So we've got the relationship with the Prophet ﷺ, which are Surah Muhammad, Fat, and Hujurat. The relationship with others, Surah Qalam, Mumtahana, As-Saf, Jumu'ah, Hadid, Mujadila, Dhariyat, and Surah Nuh. And finally, the relationship with family is Surah Talaq and Surah Tahrim. So inshallah, I'm going to make a start. We're going to be revisiting these topics. There is going to be quite a bit of information, or no, I wouldn't say they're all over the place, but there is going to be quite a bit of information, but I request that you stay with me, stay focused, inshallah. Hopefully, may Allah give me the tawfiq to project my voice in such a way that you all understand, inshallah. So let's start then. So let's start with fulfilling the rights of the Prophet ﷺ, and how do these surahs tell us how to fulfill the rights of the Prophet ﷺ? Now, there are two main themes across these three surahs in the first category, and that is struggle in the way of Allah, so jihad, and our relationship with the Prophet ﷺ. Now, we've spoken a lot about struggle in the way of Allah previously, and this is a continuous theme throughout many of these surahs. So my focus is going to be the relationship with the Prophet ﷺ. And Surah Muhammad, it talks about the obedience to the Prophet ﷺ is a method by which one can determine if action has been accepted or rejected. So, for example, if we're doing actions that comply with the Sunnah, the Hadith, then you know that inshallah those actions will be rejected or they'll be accepted. In Surah Fath, we say that what is it to love and respect the Prophet? In Surah Fath, we see the story and the incident of the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, which I'll very briefly discuss in a minute with you. And this demonstrates the obedience to the Prophet ﷺ. And finally, Hujurat is how do we, as a result of that love and respect, how do we behave around the Prophet ﷺ? So with the love and respect we have for the Prophet ﷺ in the form of action. And so that's the general theme across all three surahs. And two ayahs actually, which really encompass all of these three themes into one, actually sit in Fath. So Surah Fath was revealed at the time of the Surah incident of Hudaybiyah. The Muslims wanted to go back to Makkah, and the Prophet and all the Muslims wanted to go back to Makkah, and they were told to come back the next year. There was a lot of anxiety. There was a lot of, there was a lot of, you could almost argue, worry in the Muslim community as to what was going to happen next. And there were things that were being done that were, the Muslims were beginning to feel very agitated about. And over here, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes to us how they reacted as a result of the incidents at Hudaybiyah, and how Allah loved the actions and the way they behaved towards the Prophet ﷺ in these situations. So Surah Fath, ayah 8 and 9 say, "Indeed, we have sent you Muhammad as a witness and a bringer of good tidings and a warner, so that you people may believe in Allah and His Messenger and honor and respect the Prophet and exalt Allah morning and afternoon." And I really want to unpack this. These two ayahs are so powerful, subhanAllah. And the best way to do that, actually, to begin with, is I'm going to give you guys an example. And the example I'm going to give you is, I'm a teacher. I'm a maths teacher by profession. And in my classroom, often I have a TA, I have my students. And often what I have to do as my role as teacher in the classroom, I turn to my TA and I speak to her directly, and I give her an instruction, any instruction, saying, right, your instruction is to ensure that the X, Y, and Z students remain on task. That is her or his instruction. I then face my students. I tell them directly that, right, the task is this that I've put on the board. I have the TA is going to come around and help you and assist you in the work that you are doing. So you guys better remain on task. Okay, so there's two things to note here. First, I'm addressing my TA and explaining the role I've given to them. Okay, so that's a direct conversation I'm having with them. And then I'm addressing my students and explaining their task and the role I've given to them. I am changing the course direction of my speech while addressing both groups of people at the same time. My students can hear my TA, the instruction I'm giving my TA, and the TA can hear the instruction I'm giving my students. Although the directed speech is at two different people, everyone in that classroom is involved in that same conversation. So how does this relate to this ayah? So what Allah has done, and this is the beauty of the Quran, subhanAllah, is that Allah is in this ayah 8, He is directly speaking to the Prophet ﷺ, that I've sent you as a witness, a bringer of good tidings, and a warner. And Allah has given the Prophet ﷺ these 3 instructions. And like the TA, right? So the TA was, your task is X, Y, and Z. Allah is looking at the Prophet, was not looking, but he's directing his speech to the Prophet ﷺ. These are the 3 tasks that I've given you, so that you people may believe in Allah. So now you guys can maybe start making the connection. And now Allah in this extract is addressing us. So the same way I was addressing my students, Allah is now addressing us. But we, as the readers of the Quran, can read what Allah has told the Prophet ﷺ, and we are reading what is directed to us as well. And here Allah has given us 3 tasks, so that we may believe in Allah and His Messenger, we honor and respect the Prophet, and exalt Allah morning and afternoon. So the Prophet ﷺ had 3 instructions that we also know about. And we have been given 3 instructions that we, of course, will know about ourselves. So let's go through each of these aspects bit by bit. Now, let's talk about honor and respect of the Prophet ﷺ, because alhamdulillah, everyone stands and believes in Allah and His Messenger. Okay, that is your fundamental. But how do you honor and respect the Prophet ﷺ? And the best way to do that is through aziruhu. This is what Allah uses to describe the honor and respect given to the Prophet ﷺ. Okay, so what this encompasses, this Arabic word is a description of how we should honor the Prophet ﷺ out of an overwhelming sense of respect for him. So example I can give to you guys about this is, say for example, I'm just going to use my dad at the airport, and say my dad is or say we're coming home from the airport, or we're packing the car, okay, we're putting suitcases in the car, and I see that my dad is packing suitcases in the car, okay. Immediately as children, what would we do? Of my father, we would go and would help my dad pack the car. But that doesn't say that my dad is incompetent of packing the car. Alhamdulillah, he's strong, he has the ability to do it, he will pick up the suitcase and put it in. But we rush to help my dad because we cannot tolerate the thought of them doing it while we're there. And that is ta'zir. Okay, it's this overwhelming respect of the Prophet ﷺ that we can't tolerate. We can't tolerate the fact that that we are there and the Prophet ﷺ is spreading the message. It gives us this overwhelming sense that we need to do something too. We need to help him. Okay, so Allah wants us to have this emotion towards the Prophet ﷺ that we want to help him because of the overwhelming respect we have for him. And this overwhelming sense of respect will make us rush to do what we're supposed to do for this thing. You know, and I want to just let you, actually, I'll mention that in just a second. Let's stop there, inshallah. There is generally a sense of respect that we have for the Prophet ﷺ anyway, but this is almost like a respect so overwhelming that we want to do everything and anything that we can to help the Prophet ﷺ. And this was the quality of the companions at the time of Hudaybiyah. Even though they were trying to suppress the agitation they had in their hearts, because they knew that that was not going to help the Prophet ﷺ in that moment. And then we look at the ayat, tuwaqiruhu. So what does tuwaqiruhu mean? Well, this is the understanding that the Prophet ﷺ is a grand personality. You know, generally speaking, when we talk about the Prophet ﷺ, there is this feeling of, of grandeur. There is this feeling that, yes, there is somebody that we need to respect. There is this element of seriousness about him. And that is generally instilled within us as Muslims, that Allah has instilled this for the Prophet ﷺ within our hearts. That is understood. But this time we are conscious of this grand personality. You know, there's this real element, and we act we show with our actions that this element of seriousness, that is a weighty matter and it's not casual. Speaking about the Prophet ﷺ is not like talking about your neighbor, you know, it's not like talking about your friend. This is somebody who is very, in the eyes of Allah, is a very, very serious matter. So we've just covered at the moment we've covered tuwaqiruhu and we've covered tu'azziruhu. So we're honoring and we're respecting the Prophet ﷺ in these 2 ways. And then the last ayah was telling us that we exalt Allah morning and afternoon, and we declare Allah's perfection night and day. So let's recap what we've done so far. So we've understood how to respect and the seriousness to the relationship we have with the Prophet ﷺ. we honor the Prophet in the way he deserves, and then we truly understand what it means to do the tasbih of Allah. Once we understand how serious of a man or how serious of a personality the Prophet ﷺ is, and we develop this sense of overwhelming respect towards him, then we can go back to Allah and we can declare his perfection, because Allah is the one who created the Prophet ﷺ, and of course he created us. So there's this, again, you know, although we are showing our respect and honor to the Prophet ﷺ, ultimately we need to remember that it is Allah who created him, and we need to show our declaration of Allah's perfection, because he's the one who fashioned the Prophet ﷺ, you know. So you might have the question, well, how you're talking about helping the Prophet ﷺ, you know, we want to do things because of our respect of the Prophet ﷺ. What does that exactly mean? And that is to continue his mission. You know, he's not with us in real life at the moment. He's not in our company. We can't physically help him. But what we mean when we say we are helping his religion is by continuing the message that he was claiming, the message that he was spreading. So, one more thing that I want to mention about this, there is a direct correlation between between respecting the Prophet ﷺ and respecting and declaring Allah's perfection. If we don't have respect for the Prophet ﷺ, then we won't have respect for Allah. We won't understand, we won't be able to really comprehend and ponder upon the beauty of how Allah fashioned the Prophet ﷺ. Okay, now, and once we've respected and honored the Prophet ﷺ, then Surah Hujurat tells us to not elevate our voice above the Prophet, to deviate, don't call out rude statements, don't mock each other, don't call bad names to one another, and don't spy, and avoid suspicion and backbiting. So subhanAllah, you can see that there's actually a slow progression. We start with obedience to the Prophet ﷺ from Surah Muhammad, then we look at Surah Fath, where we talk about how do we love and honor the Prophet ﷺ. Now in Surah Hujurat, once we have established that, we then look at, well, how is that now translated into action? And these are all the points at the very start of Surah Hujurat about how we should behave in the Prophet ﷺ's company and ultimately with ourselves in our community. So once we fulfill the rights of the Prophet ﷺ, then we are in a position, we have the tools where we can now fulfill the rights of others and respect them. Okay, so we can see, subhanAllah, that now we've finished, just by doing this bit, we've understood and we've acknowledged how do we fulfill the rights of the Prophet ﷺ. And now we can talk about fulfilling the rights of others and respecting them. So Surah Mujadila is a very, very good example of our social etiquettes. And Surah Mujadila is very hot on how the etiquettes of holding meetings. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about this. And there's one ayah, or there's a bunch of these group of ayahs, ayah 7 to 13, where Allah actually addresses what are the etiquettes of holding meetings within us. Alhamdulillah, we have a lot of meetings, or we've been to halaqas and things like that before. What are the etiquettes of that of a gathering such as that? And in order to elaborate on this, I'm going to give you a little bit of context. Now, the hypocrites during the Prophet ﷺ's time as we know, were secretly a separate group from the believers. Okay, and we learned right at the beginning in Surah Baqarah actually that the Prophet ﷺ didn't even know the hypocrites existed. It was only through the revelation that he realized that there are these sorts of people in the community as well. Okay, so Allah through the Quran has humiliated the hypocrites. And it's the same sort of concept here as well. So, the believers didn't know whether or not what the hypocrites were talking about, what they were doing, where they were. And a prominent feature of the hypocrites was that they would secretly form a separate group from the believers and whisper amongst themselves. And Muslims saw them, and whenever the Muslims saw them, they found them whispering. Okay? And in these group of eyes, Allah really emphasizes that Allah is always present. And Allah is present because Allah knows and hears what they conspire, even though the believers did not know, even though in some cases the Prophet ﷺ might not know either, but Allah knows. Now, a word, the Arabic word that is used here to describe this is najwa. Najwa means talking secretly together. And we need to understand that this in itself is not forbidden. Okay, but it depends on the character of the people who are involved and the nature of that consultation. So, for example, if there are people in the community who are known to cause mischief, they're usually up to no good, and they are consulting, and although they may not execute their plan or whatever, conspiring in that small group, that still stirs confusion and divisions in Muslims. Why? Like, think about it. If, for example, you saw a group of people who are talking amongst each other, immediately you start thinking, oh, I wonder what they're talking about. Oh, and then that's where the assumptions start. That's where shaitan comes, okay? And that's when shaitan starts enhancing and elaborating on these thoughts that, oh, maybe these people are talking about this. Maybe they're talking about that. Oh my gosh, maybe they're talking about this. Oh, I need to tell other people. I need to let them know that this is what they're conspiring. And this, this is why a conspiracy in secret is shaitan's work. Because although this group of people have not executed whatever plan that they are thinking about, they are discussing in that group, but look at me, I'm now thinking about 100 million things that these people could be thinking about, and I go back to the community and I tell them. And honestly, this is such a huge problem in our day and age at the moment. We assume, we make presumptions, we think something without it being justified. And Surah Hujurat, going back to Surah Hujurat, this tells us to always verify news, and this leads on very nicely to that. Now, leading to that is that if a Muslim sees others whispering and this causes doubt in the Muslim, that individual should not be so offended that they take actions such as to retaliate. Okay, again, they should not act on this assumption, and then this also is the repercussions of shaitan. This is what shaitan is instilling within us. And this is how shaitan causes division in society. That, no, you said this and you said this, but no, you said that, and this is what I thought, and this is what I saw you do, but this is what really happened. It becomes very, very messy. And this, not only in the community, we see this within our own families. And inshallah, towards the end of today, we will be looking at family structure as well. So when Allah talks about conspiring in secret, this is the etiquette of holding meetings. We know the hadith that if there are two people sitting, if there are three people sitting, and two of them are whispering, it's just a social etiquette that the third person will generally feel left out. So it's a social etiquette that Allah reminds us of, And another etiquette that is also described here is that if we are sitting together and if we are, we're discussing something, we always try and make room in our assemblies, so a lot of us remember that if we've been to like halaqas and someone has come through the door, then we always shuffle around in room. So yes, we talked about the conspiracy side, but we've also talked about the etiquette of holding meetings. How should we as believers, when we are in a gathering, how do we behave towards other people? Again, we are looking at this element of respecting other people, these people who have joined us. Now, how are we now expected to behave with those who are non-Muslim? So we've talked a lot about believers, we've talked a lot about how we should, we've talked a lot about how we shouldn't, conspiracies and discussions and meetings. So a lot of this is to do with believers amongst themselves. But let's talk a little bit now about da'wah. Again, if we're talking about respecting the rights of others and we're fulfilling the rights of others, it's not limited to just believers. We're looking at how we're expected to behave with non-Muslims as well. And the two most beautiful surahs to encapsulate this are Surah Nur. And Surah Nur, it really describes and discusses Nuh alayhi salam's entire da'wah strategy. And when he called to the people to the religion, his people ran away further. And for example, if you've got a child, if you've given them an instruction and they're not listening and they're persistently not listening, how aggravated do you as a mother or father become? You become so aggravated. So imagine Nuh alayhi salam. Nuh alayhi salam was preaching to his community for 950 years, and this is what they used to do. You know, so subhanAllah, you know, that Nuh alayhi salam is described as a prophet who has tried everything. 950 years is a very long time. And he's tried absolutely everything. The more he told his people forgiveness, they would ignore him by putting fingers in their ears, by putting clothes around themselves, like, you know, covering themselves physically, because they just did not want him. Nuh alayhi salam tried everything. He even tried to give da'wah by using glad tidings of children and wealth. He said, if you just come and repent, you will get children, you'll be the wealthiest. But every time he tried to stop the people from idol worshipping, they become more obedient. So Nuh alayhi salam, you can almost imagine that he was in a situation where he was completely stuck. And how many times do we find ourselves in a situation where we're trying to explain to our the people or to those around us, and they are just listening. They're just, you know, it's completely out of their remit to understand. They just don't understand. So what do we learn from Surah Nuh is that we learn to give da'wah in the best ways possible by trying all avenues. We're not just limited to, you know, a lot of the time when we think of da'wah, we think of street da'wah, people are still on the street, they're giving da'wah to nearby people. But Allah is telling us that da'wah is not limited to just proclamation of speech. You know, we give da'wah in secret, we give da'wah in public, we are encouraging, yet we have this element of warning. So, you know, there's various avenues by which we talk to people. Again, this element of respecting people. We've learned from previous surahs that we don't say things that offend other people's gods or their religion, because what happens is that they will then retaliate and say something wrong about our God. So there's these, you know, there's etiquettes, again, social etiquettes, and, you know, being respectful to other people when we're giving da'wah. And Nuh alayhi salam, never once did he lose, I'm sure he must have, as a human being, he feel very agitated, but never once did he lose his temper. Never once did he feel like he's giving up. He did it for 950 years. And at the end, after 950 years, what did he do? Did he go and suddenly tell everyone to just, oh, you know, I'm fed up with you guys, I'm out of here? He made dua to Allah. So what do we learn? We learn that if we have tried we have to first try every possible thing in order to help people understand. And if they don't understand, we turn to Allah. Because at the end, what did Allah tell the Prophet ﷺ? That you are not the one who is going to guide people. You are not the one who is going to give hidayah. Hidayah comes from Allah. So can you just imagine, just imagine Nuh alayhi salam doing all of this for 950 years. Another example that is mentioned in Dariyat about da'wah, Ibrahim alayhi salam's story is highlighted here. And this again is da'wah in a slightly different way. Ibrahim alayhi salam, in this story, angels approached Ibrahim alayhi salam, and these angels came in the form of humans, and they were not known to us. Ibrahim alayhi salam in this instant did not know that these men were angels. And when the angels came, Ibrahim alayhi salam, he welcomed them. He was very hospitable to them. He was very kind to them. He asked angels, well, he didn't know they were angels, but he asked them to sit down. He presented food to them. And, you know, he was very, very hospitable. So what does this teach us? Right? He only realized they were angels when they did not eat. Then he realized that these people were actually, they weren't angels. They weren't someone from this dunya. But what do we understand from this? And it's a very small snippet of from Surah Dariyat about Ibrahim alayhi salam's story here. That one form of da'wah is to be kind even to strangers. So again, this idea of fulfilling the rights of others, for respecting or for, you know, being respectful to other people, that actions speak louder than words. You know, these angels, when they were in, you know, they just sort of like common men, standard men. But even to strangers, Ibrahim alayhi salam told them to come. He gave them food, he gave them a drink, he was hospitable to them. And he did this, and this was in his nature, he did this with everybody. So that perhaps, inshallah, through actions, people can reflect, people can be inspired. So what have we learned so far with Nuh alayhi salam's story? That not to give up. not to exhaust our options, that we keep trying and we still respect people. And at the end, we make dua to Allah if people are not believing. And in Ibrahim alayhi salam's story, what do we learn? One form of dawah is to be kind even to strangers. You know, even if they, you know, I mean, actually it's interesting because yesterday I was having another small circle with a group of friends. You know, one of my friends mentioned that when Musa alayhi salam was approaching Fir'aun, what did Allah tell Musa alayhi salam? Speak to Fir'aun gently. This is a tyrant. This is somebody who is the worst human of that time. And even then Allah commanded Musa alayhi salam to go and speak to Fir'aun gently. And look at us. We're here, we get aggravated by the smallest things. If someone doesn't listen to something that we say, we get so agitated, so aggravated, we just start saying, oh, you know what, forget this, man, like, forget it. You know, we're not gonna do this now. Let's get out of here. You're not gonna listen, you're not gonna listen. But Allah is teaching us that no, we need to be kind. We can't have the attitude of giving up. And once we have been mindful of this social etiquette, once we have understood the respect that we need to show to the Prophet ﷺ, honored him, we have declared Allah's perfection, we have understood and we have the tools to now be respectful of other people within our own community and those outside our community, then we unite as a nation. Because if we can't respect others and we can't respect people in our own community and within our own Muslims, within ourselves, how on earth are we expected then to unite as a nation? And here, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Saf, now I'm going to come to, tells us, "Oh, you have believed, why do you say what you do not do?" And the first thing Allah tells us, he reprimands the Muslims here. And he's saying that you guys, you know, you are showing the faith and the strength, you're not showing the strength and faith that is not expected of you. So why are you doing things that you don't, why do you say what you don't do? You know, in yourselves, in amongst yourselves, almost there's this element of hypocrisy that is coming out. You know, why do you declare Allah's perfection doesn't reflect on what you do in your behavior, in your lifestyles? You know, we just talked about declaring Allah's perfection. Well, how on earth, how are you doing that when you can't even reflect on that and you can't even follow the actions that I've told you to do? What's interesting here is that, and I'm going to elaborate this in a while as well, that there's a group in the Quran called the Musabbihat, and they all start with sabbaha or some sort of glorification of Allah. And Surah As-Saf is an example of that. What is interesting is that Allah compares the submission of the sky and the earth and all of his creations with the submission of the humans. And what Allah does here is that Allah has created all these things. Allah has created, you know, earth, Allah has created heavens, Allah has created jinn, Allah has created humans, Allah has created insects and animals. And all these things that are not jinn and human, everything declares the perfection of Allah day and night. Everything recognizes Allah's perfection. But us and jinn kind, who are meant to be the best examples of Allah's creation, even we can't do that. So Allah is comparing the best example of servitude should be humans, but we're not. And that's why Allah is reprimanding us here. Why do you say what you don't do? Why are you declaring Allah's perfection when you yourselves don't even understand or you don't reflect on what we do in our behavior and our lifestyle? And then Allah tells us that Allah indeed loves those who fight in his way as though they are solid walls cemented with molten lead. Okay, so once Allah has kind of given us a little bit of a telling off, then he reminds us that if we are united together, we are a solid wall. But we're not only just a solid wall, we are solid wall cemented with molten lead. So think about a brick wall, you know, like the foundations of a house when you're building a brick wall. You have the brick wall, that's great. But even that is being hammered in with molten lead. This element of establishment, this element of being, we are a nation that is expected to be established in the way of Allah, that give wealth for the sake of Allah, that, you know, are meant to be joined together as one ummah. And Allah tells us that when you know, why do you say what you don't do? If you don't do that, if you do the inverse of that, so if you act on your intent, or if you act on what you are saying that you are doing, then, and all of you combined do that, then we are like a solid wall cemented with molten lead. No one can break us. So when it comes to unity and Jama'ah, this is the surah that we really need to look at. We need to really understand what Allah is telling us in these two ayahs. And then what does Allah do after this? In ayah 14 of the same surah, Allah gives us examples. And here Allah gives us examples of two prophets. Allah gives us the example of Isa alayhi salam and Musa alayhi salam. And he says that in Isa alayhi salam's situation, Isa alayhi salam and his disciples agreed to help Isa alayhi salam. And they are the ones who raised their hand and said, we are Allah's helpers. But on the other hand, we look at Musa alayhi salam and Bani Israel. What happened? Musa alayhi salam asked for help. Who is my helper to Allah? And Bani Israel, what do they say? You go with your Lord and you go into that town, and we're not gonna, you guys go, we're here, we'll listen. They were just riding on this bandwagon. So we have been given examples of how we need to behave. We can't be, and we've heard this time and time again, Musa alayhi salam and Bani Israel's example, and Allah tells us that Isa alayhi salam and his disciples' example is what we need to be like. And through this, we all have one goal. And what is that one goal that Allah describes to us in the same surah? Is to believe in Allah and Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and to exert ourselves and our wealth for the sake of Allah. Okay, because this is exactly what Bani Israel did not do. And we'll talk about this in just a minute in regards to wealth, because it's a very interesting point, inshallah. So this is our invitation. In this surah, Allah invites us personally to become the helpers of Allah and His religion. Or the helpers of spreading Allah's word of the deen. And this is our invitation. And once we have acknowledged and accepted this invitation, we are taught how to work as a united nation, Jama'ah. So subhanAllah, I hope you guys can still follow the structure that I'm going through. We started with respect. We've understood how to respect the Prophet ﷺ, respect for those around us, Muslim and non-Muslim. And once we've understood how to respect others, then we can work together then we can unite as a nation. And in that, we have been told, or we've been a little bit reprimanded, and we've been given examples of how we need to do that, or what is a united nation? What is a united ummah? And now Allah is going to tell us how to work as that united ummah in Jama'ah. So let's have a look at what Jama'ah actually means. Jama'ah first implies that Allah has given us a prophet whose teachings are universal and eternal principles. So the fact that the Quran revealed to the Prophet ﷺ, who was unlettered, okay, that goes to show that the Quran is for those who are lettered, who are educated and who are educated and uneducated, read and unread, lettered and unlettered. And then this gives us a sound basis for a single unified community. So once we understood that Allah is Allah is the one, once we've understood that Allah is one and Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is His messenger, then we understand this gives us a foundation. It gives us a foundation for a single unified community. And this is a miracle of Allah only by His wisdom. Because, why? Because the Prophet ﷺ was unlettered, and this revelation came to the Prophet ﷺ who was unlettered, and it's only by Allah's wisdom that He's able to teach all of mankind regardless of their educational status. So this is what working in Jama'ah means. We all need to be able to understand this, which follows on from our tasks. Believe in Allah and believe in the Prophet ﷺ. Now, what's interesting here is that this exact picture was given to the people of Bani Israel as well. And the people of the Torah, the Bani Israel, they have the responsibility of guiding the world according to the Torah. exactly like we have. The Bani Israel and our society are very, very similar. They were also given this responsibility, okay? But they didn't understand this responsibility, and nor did they discharge it as they should have. Okay, and why is that? And actually, what's interesting here is that Allah actually compares the Bani Israel in the surah, where he compares them to a donkey. And why? It is just as a donkey loaded with books that does not know what it is loaded with. So are these people loaded with, these people are loaded with the Torah, and they do not know what this book was sent for and what are its demands. So subhanAllah, have a look. Allah is comparing the Bani Israel, the way that they carry their book is like that of a donkey. The donkey doesn't know what's on his back. When you load it with books, it doesn't know what's on his back, and neither did the Bani Israel. They didn't know what was on their backs either. They didn't understand the Torah. They didn't spread the message of the Torah either. So what lesson do we learn here? That if we don't abide by these teachings, our relationship with the Quran becomes artificial. And as a result, we will lose this purpose in life. So just from those two tasks that we were given, we learn that we must not let our relationship with the Quran be artificial. This teaching that was given to a prophet who was unlettered, we cannot let this become just something to just gaze at, something that's on our backs and we don't even know what it's there for. And now we look at Surah Jumu'ah. So Surah Jumu'ah, what this encompasses is your remembrance of Allah. Okay, and actually we'll talk about wealth as well, but this is, it mainly encompasses remembrance of Allah through Jumu'ah, okay, like Friday prayer, okay? And another comparison that I want to make here is that from one of the greatest failings of Bani Israel was that when they were asked to observe Sabbath on the Saturday, they didn't. And that was their initial downfall. Okay, so let's try and make comparisons between our Friday and their Sabbath, okay? So on the Sabbath, they were asked to leave their worldly aspirations behind, but they couldn't. They were too engrossed in their wealth. They were too engrossed. They were too tempted to continue their business on Saturday and find loopholes. Okay, and so Allah also has given us an hour on Friday, an hour, 2 hours on Friday, where we need to leave the world behind. And we need to dedicate our time to this cause of Allah, to be united, okay? But what do we do with this 1 hour? What do we do? When we're sat in khutbah, what do a lot of people do? We start scrolling on our phones, we start thinking about other things, we think about our business, we start thinking about work. We can't sit still. We arrive late in some cases. And Allah is reminding us that while He has given us this religious affair, we need to balance our worldly affairs with our religious affairs, and we need to put our worldly affairs on hold momentarily. We need to prioritize this jama'ah in this instance. So what's interesting here is I'm going to tell you guys the four purposes of Jumu'ah, and we'll see how this links. So the first purpose is the Khatib recites ayahs from the Quran, okay? And by doing so, this cleanses people, and the congregation cleanses us all because we are being reminded of the Quran. It teaches us the laws of Allah, and we internalize this wisdom of Allah in the Quran. So we begin to reflect on this. And if we can do that for that 1 hour, if the Friday prayer is given its due and we treat it the way it is deserved to be treated, then the entire ummah is on course. The ummah is doing what it's supposed to do. So Friday prayer has a very, very big importance in our lives, because look at Bani Israel. They were given the Sabbath and they didn't do that, and look at what happened to them. They were divided. They were not like the molten lead structure Allah was talking about in Surah Saf. And Allah, He has given us Friday. And if we can't hasten to remember Allah, and if we cannot understand the purpose of unity, then we too will become divided. So, and then Allah reassures us that after that, you guys can go and do your business as normal. Everything is fine. But for that hour, 2 hours, we must pause our worldly affairs for the sake of Allah. So let's have a look more at this religious affairs and worldly affairs. What is Allah talking about? So religious affairs we just spoke about was in Surah Jumu'ah. But what about worldly affairs? And worldly affairs come in Surah Hadid. And I'm going to elaborate a little bit more on Surah Hadid, inshallah, because it's a very beautiful surah here that I want to elaborate. I mean, I recommend that you guys go away and do a lot more research on Surah Hadid because there is so much to discuss here. But I'm going to emphasize on the wealth that Allah, the aspect of wealth, worldly affairs and wealth using Surah Hadid, inshallah. Let's begin first though. Surah Hadid is another example of what Musabbihat, okay? And it starts with the glorification of Allah. And all of the surahs that are encompassed in the Musabbihat, they talk about glorification in such a way that glorification of Allah was in the past and it continues to be in the present and future. Okay, so we need to understand that all of these surahs start with the glorification of Allah that was once before and it continues now and it will continue. So let's go through just some of them. I mean, I know a lot of people this Ramadan, I've seen it on social media a lot, is that a lot of people are doing names of Allah and they're trying to memorize them, which is absolutely fantastic. I want to just delve into just a few of these. I'm not going to go through all of them. Unfortunately, we don't have time. But, you know, let's start off with Allah being Aziz. So Allah is the power. He's the Almighty. And with this might, Allah has wisdom. So usually when you have someone in a position of leadership, they're very mighty, they're very powerful, but they often or they sometimes lack wisdom. But Allah is telling us that He is mighty, He's powerful, and He has this wisdom as well. Another one that Allah tells us is that He's the ever-living, and He gives life and He gives death. And he has the dominion of all the skies and the earth and whatever is in it. And what's interesting here is that, yes, He knows what's going on in this dunya, but He physically knows what's going on inside the earth. He knows what's going on inside the graves. And He knows what's going on above as well, meaning not only just above in the sense of the earth and the heavens, but He knows about our good deeds, where our good deeds are going, where our bad deeds are going. He knows where our souls are in the akhirah, in the barzakh. He knows that. And He created the heaven and the earth in 6 days, and then He established Himself on the throne, on His throne. But that doesn't necessarily mean just Him Himself. He established His law on humankind, on everybody else. So subhanAllah, there are so many elements here that we can really, really take from. And I would really recommend that you guys go away and look more at the Musabbihat and look at the names of Allah that He has used to describe Himself. So let's go from looking at Allah's qualities to what Allah tells us about spending out of that which He has made you successes, which is from ayah 7 right here. Okay, so Allah says, believe in Allah and His Messenger and spend out of that which He has made you successes. For those who have believed among you and spend, there will be a great reward. And there's a few things that I want to tell you here, is that look out, every time that Allah mentions the word salah in the Quran, you know, He talks about giving zakat. Okay, so those two things go hand in hand. Belief in Allah and His Messenger has a direct correlation with spending out of spending for the sake of Allah. So faith alone is not enough. Faith means we have to give. Okay, and what do we spend in the way of Allah? So it doesn't necessarily just mean just give money. We're spending with the intention of spending for the sake of Allah. So faith and expenditure go hand in hand. Without faith, we can't spend in the way of Allah because we don't have purpose. We don't know why we're doing it. And if we are spending in the way of Allah, then we should have faith. So Allah showed us His attributes. And He's saying to us that if I am all these things, then who are you not to spend? Therefore, faith requires submission to Allah. And then we can spend in the way of Allah. And then Allah tells us what do we spend out of that which we have been made, which He has made you successes. Now, what does successes here mean? Successes means that spend whatever has been given to us by Allah. So these are things that Allah has bestowed upon us as blessings, and they are things that are temporary for us. So for example, wealth is temporary, our abilities are temporary, our time is temporary, but whatever Allah has blessed us with, these are the things that we should spend. So when we talk about expenditure, yes, money is a form of expense, but we're looking at skills, abilities, time, and wealth. And subhanAllah, look at how Allah names the surah Sadid, which means iron. Now, what does iron represent? Iron represents wealth, strength, establishment. Through these things, we can establish society with strength and sorry, I'm getting tongue-tied here. With spending in the way of Allah, we can establish society, and we have the strength to do that as well. So all of these things are being very encapsulated in this. Now let's move on to how Allah describes people who have not spent Allah. Okay, and sorry, one more thing I forgot to mention. Allah wants to see who will rise to support His religion through this expense. That's one more side note that I wanted to make. Now, let's move on now. So we've talked about religious affairs. We were on the topic of worldly affairs. We've been given an example of those who don't spend the way of Allah. We looked at the Bani Israel, how they tried out of their religious affairs, the Sabbath, and how we are expected not to do that. Surah Hadid describes to us how we are expected to spend in the way of Allah through using submission towards Him. Now let's look at an example where this did not happen. But let's an example that is mentioned in the Quran, a story which is mentioned in the Quran, where these people did not spend in the way of Allah. And let's see what happened. So, there was once a man who grew a farm for the purpose of providing nourishment for the people of his town. After he died, his sons inherited this farm and harvested it. The poor people used to wait at the gates of the farm so that the farmers could bring the harvest to them for a share. One season, they knew their harvest was going to be very fruitful. However, this time, the farmers planned a scheme such that none of the poor people can get anything. They spoke and vowed amongst themselves to leave very early in the morning, to speak in a low voice, go in a sneaky way, get harvest, and come it back. Next morning, when they arrived at the farm, they found it completely destroyed, so much so that they doubted within themselves whether or not they arrived at the correct farm to begin with. So what exactly happened here? What is the moral of this story? Allah describes this in Surah Qalam. What is exactly, what exactly happened? So let's look at this story in a little bit more detail. The first thing I need to tell you guys is that the father and his sons were righteous people. They were believers. They were good people. So the father had made farm for the purpose of a good cause. The sons were not bad. And the second thing is that the sons weren't bad with poor people either. They were righteous boys as well. They were righteous farmers. They didn't physically push the poor people, or they weren't physically nasty to them. They weren't doing any of that. They just simply talked amongst each other and agreed to avoid the poor. That is all they did. They had the intention of not helping them. And they went as far as executing that plan as well. And that's why when they got to the field, there was nothing there, because Allah sent a punishment to their farm. So the desire to deny the poor made themselves poor. So what do we learn here? The irony, they hadn't actually committed the action of not helping. It was simply the intention, and that was enough to enrage Allah. So the irony is that this farm was grown by their father, and he grew it for the purpose of providing for the poor people. Okay, so the father intended for the farm to be used in a good way, right? So these farms were a blessing until when? Until sons cut off the purpose of this farm. They cut off the poor people entirely. However, because the farm was intended for a good purpose, Allah saw even that little bit of righteousness in their sons. Allah saw that little bit of righteousness and goodness within the boys. And this is why Allah destroyed the farm, but didn't destroy the sons. So what lessons can we learn? That, yes, we find money alluring. We do wealth alluring. Sometimes we do get greedy. Sometimes we like that. Sometimes we want to hoard money. Wealth is not bad. You know, often in the Quran, Allah talks about spending money as if maybe we get the impression that maybe wealth is not a good thing. That's not the case. Wealth is not inherently evil. It only, wealth can become a blessing. Wealth does have barakah if we spend it and if it is in the hands of God-fearing people. Then it becomes beautiful. Wealth makes this life beautiful. We know that. But we also know that doing good deeds with that money is better. And so if we spend this wealth in society for a good cause, Allah will put barakah in our expenditure, which will continue for generations. And on a side note, let's look at Uthman radiallahu anhu. Uthman radiallahu anhu's charity. He was one of the wealthiest men of his time, and he donated so generously for the sake of the ummah. And subhanallah, it is that charity that Uthman radiallahu anhu gave at the very beginning that still drives our society today. So had it not been for his charity, we would be in a far worse off position. And one more thing about wealth, now that we're on this topic, is about risk. And in Surah Dhariyat, Allah tells us that risk is determined, it's determined such that there is no doubt in it. And the parable that Allah gives in the Quran about it is as if, when you've got someone talking, like right now I'm talking to you. Is there any doubt that I'm not talking? No. I mean, if you tell somebody, or my sister comes into the room and says, Summer is not talking, you guys would think that she's going crazy because there's absolutely no doubt in the fact that I am. So that is the power that Allah gives, that risk is determined without much certainty. So, and what do we get at the end out of spending in the way of Allah? Okay, we spent in the way of Allah, we've helped the religion. What benefit does that give to us? Allah in Surah Al-Ghabun tells us, if you lend a beautiful loan to Allah, He will double it to your benefit and forgive you your sin. For Allah is appreciative and forbearing. He knows what is beyond perception, as well as what is plainly visible, for He is the powerful and wise. So to Allah, our charity, not necessarily money-wise, but our expenditure of wealth is a loan to Allah. So Allah will repay this back. And we cover this back in Surah Baqarah as well, and in many other parts of the Quran too. So let's look at some of these qualities that we've talked about. We've talked about enduring hardship. We've talked about how we are struggling in the way of Allah. We looked at the companions' examples. We spent in the way of Allah as well. And we are trying to be strong and noble. We're spending for Allah's cause. And what does Allah describe to us? Who shows all, these qualities? None other than the Prophet ﷺ. So the Prophet ﷺ is an example of someone who did all of these things of excellence. And this concludes the first two categories that we spoke about. So he was the prime example of how we should show respect, how we should glorify Allah, how we should respect others, how we should spend wealth, how we should not spend wealth, how we should be helpers of the deen, how we should continue the message of Allah. And this is all encapsulated in the character of the Prophet ﷺ. Now, in Surah Mumtahana, Allah gives us examples of enemies. Do not make friends with my enemies and your enemies. So we need to understand that if we're doing all of this for the sake of Allah, we need to be aware of who our enemies are too, right? It's all well and good that we're talking about the believers. It's great that we are talking about unity, but we need to understand who we're standing up against. Allah describes them as the enemies of Allah often are those who are wealthy, which beautifully ties into what we're talking about with spending in the way of Allah. You find the people of the Quraysh, they weren't poor people. They were very, very wealthy people, but they disobeyed Allah. And Allah tells us not to become impressed by these sorts of people. Allah is warning us that these people who are hoarding their wealth, who are being proud and arrogant, they are the ones who are wealthy. So that's why Allah is encouraging us to spend in the way of Allah, so we humble ourselves. So who are the enemies of Allah? They are the ones who take multiple oaths in fear of people not believing them. They are the people who find faults. They are the ones who are miserly and stingy. They are notorious for doing bad things. They're ill-mannered and quarrelsome, and they're proud because they possess wealth and children. Is that last box not the exact inverse of everything we've just spoken about? The people who find faults, they have nothing good to do but criticize. They're miserly and they're stingy. They don't want to spend in the way of Allah. They're notorious for bad things. They conspire. We talked about conspiring secretly. They're ill-mannered and quarrelsome. They don't respect others. They are proud because they have wealth and children. Again, this idea of not in the way of Allah. So we've learned about everything we should do, but the enemies of Allah, if you don't do them. So let's summarize there's a lot of information that we've got. So I want to summarize before moving on to the next bit. So we started off this session with establishing a relationship with the Prophet ﷺ, and we looked at showing obedience to him. And what does it mean for him? And now we just finished our relationship with society. The call for the Ummah to be united, the call for the united Ummah to be helpers of the religion, and the call for the united Ummah to spend in the way of Allah and understand who our enemies are and what we should not become like those stingy farmers from that story that we learned in Surah Qalam. Okay? So, and once we have the right of others, Allah reminds us to come right back down. Come right down to the family unit. Because none of this can happen unless your home, your lifestyle, what's happening behind closed doors is intact. So subhanAllah, look, Allah tells us that we have a wider responsibility to society, yes. But we have a responsibility to fulfill the rights of our families as well. So the two surahs I'm going to focus on are At-Talaq and Surah Tahrim. But here, At-Talaq, I would recommend go and do your own research on At-Talaq. They're mainly all fiqh issues in terms of laws of divorce and iddah period and such. I'm not going to be elaborating on that too much, but I am going to be looking into Surah At-Tahrim quite a bit because we're looking at details on how families should discipline their households, which I think everyone could benefit from. So, the first thing in the first ayah of Surah Tahrim, Allah tells us, "O Prophet," so he's directly speaking to the Prophet, "why do you prohibit yourself from what Allah has made for you, seeking the approval of your wives? And Allah is most forgiving, most merciful." So, just to give you a bit of background to this, is that there was an incident where the Prophet ﷺ wanted to make one of his wives happy. And she didn't like something, or there was some element that either food or something that she didn't like. Or she didn't like a certain smell on the Prophet ﷺ, I'm not sure. And as a result of trying to please this wife, he did not consume that. He did not do that. And Allah is reprimanding that. But why is Allah reprimanding it? So the reason why Allah is reprimanding this is because essentially Allah is saying, why are you making things harder for yourself when Allah has allowed you to do these things? You know, this is no crime. So what we need to understand also is that everything in the Prophet's life and whatever he did has been magnified, right? We take every little nitty-gritty example of the Prophet ﷺ and we have really looked right into it so that we can follow from it. And as his followers, we look and we're going to try and justify those actions that he did do and those he didn't do. So for example, if you didn't eat or drink something, we interpret it as, oh, there must be something wrong with it, so we shouldn't do it either. So as a result of that, the Prophet might be leaving a legacy he didn't actually want to leave behind simply because of his preference. So what Allah is doing in this ayah is Allah puts his foot down. Allah stops the Prophet ﷺ and tells the Prophet ﷺ not to be too hard on himself. Because if he is harsh on himself, then his followers will be harsh on themselves. And then this is a legacy that will continue for generations and generations and generations. So Allah is actually looking out for us by reprimanding the Prophet ﷺ in this ayah. So Allah is saying, go easy on yourself for your own sake. So Allah is reprimanding the Prophet ﷺ to take care of us. SubhanAllah, isn't that beautiful? That yes, the Prophet ﷺ has been told not to do something, but ultimately Allah is trying to look after our well-being. And there's a lesson for us here. This is not for the Prophet ﷺ. We need to understand that for those of us who are in a position of authority in our local communities, then we will have an influence on those around us. People will look up on us for various reasons, for anything. And, even children look up to us today. So we need to be very careful about what legacy we are leaving behind. Are we doing something which is allowed in Islam, but are making it difficult to follow or implement? Or worse, are we preventing ourselves and our family doing something which is allowed? So we need to be very, very careful here that when we have a position of authority in our society, we need to be very careful about the legacy that we are leaving behind. There are people that are looking up to us from all sorts of angles. And if there are young people listening to this, think about your bloggers or your vloggers and your YouTubers. Think about what they're doing. Are they leaving a legacy behind? So many people follow these YouTubers and bloggers, don't they? And if you are one of them, then are you doing the right thing? People are watching you. This is no longer just about me and myself, and I choose to do what I like to do. And, shouldn't have an influence on anyone else. No. Whatever Allah tells us in this ayah, that whatever you're doing, and if you are on a platform, we need to look after ourselves. We need to be mindful of our actions. The other lesson we learned from this is that let's consider a person who has, again, a very high position in his career, whether it be a consultant or a manager of a company or whoever. And these people often find it very difficult to find time for their families, don't they? You find a lot of people in authoritative positions, they don't have time for their families, do they? They're very busy, they're going on meetings, they're going on, visits, they do this and do that. It's just natural. That's natural because it's the name of their job. So here, Allah has given the Prophet ﷺ the biggest task of humanity. This is bigger than your CEO. This is bigger than the president. Allah has given the Prophet ﷺ the heaviest task ever in mankind. So naturally, the Prophet ﷺ must not have any time for his family, right? But Allah is telling us that the Prophet ﷺ better not put undue pressure on himself at home. He shouldn't make things impermissible on himself by making his life even an ounce harder than it already is. Because every ounce of energy that it needs to be exhausted on the larger mission of Allah. So at home, the Prophet ﷺ should be at peace and at ease. So guys, let's relate this to ourselves. If we are doing the work of Allah, subhanAllah, often you put a correlation between those who do the work of Allah and their lifestyle at home. Allah is looking out for us. I was so astounded. I was telling my family actually that I was so amazed by how Allah looks after us. That if we are doing Allah's work, then even our household should be accommodated to that. Everything at home should be supportive. It should be at harmony, it should be at ease. Because the moment our lifestyles at home are not, that will have a ripple effect to everything else. It will influence the work outside. So subhanAllah, just have a look at the correlation Allah is making, that yes, he's talking to the Prophet in this one ayah, but look at how many lessons we are gaining from it. And how we should understand that if we are going to go and do the work of Allah, we should be open with our family. This is the mission that you're about to do. Therefore, everyone should be on board. Everybody should understand that this is a very heavy task. The task of da'wah is not easy. So we should not put undue pressure on ourselves to make things life difficult for us at home by making the what's allowed for us impermissible. Let's move on to a couple more stories that Allah is talking about in this surah, and there are two stories here that Allah is referring to. The first story is that the Prophet ﷺ entrusted one wife with some confidential information. She did not keep it private and told another wife or told somebody else. I mean, she didn't think it was a big deal to tell somebody else. And it was given by relation to the Prophet ﷺ that the secret he had told her had been leaked. Now, we don't know what this secret is. We have no idea. We are going to delve into it either. And the second story in this surah is that the wives of the Prophet ﷺ grew jealous and plotted against another wife. So just by looking at these summaries of these stories, we really see that the Prophet's home life is very similar. It's very normal, isn't it? Like, it's natural for wives to become jealous. Oh, mashallah, he had lots of wives, but it's natural, right? The feelings of a woman haven't changed. Sometimes we also fall into this trap that, oh, my husband told me something. Oh, it's all right, I'll just tell someone. So it's not a big deal. That's what they did too. So, they didn't think it was a big deal. And again, this idea of, plotting against another wife, it wasn't like a serious plot, God forbid, of, killing or anything like that. It wasn't that sort of plot. It was a very small thing. It wasn't anything big. But we don't need to worry about what it was. But it was just something that we think is quite trivial. They're both things that are very, very trivial that we actually experience in our relationships, probably even on a day-to-day basis. But why is Allah putting this in the Quran? Allah has put this in the Quran because the domestic relationship between husband and wife is something that is so sacred to Allah. Okay, in story number 1 over here, that even if your husband has told you something, even that you think is so basic, that you think it's so trivial, even that is sacred to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That even when a husband and wife share something between each other, that small thing is of sacred value in the eyes of Allah. And the fact that the wife of the Prophet ﷺ told somebody is a violation of the highest caliber. Allah is teaching us that although we might think this small thing is a light matter, it is not to Him. It's not to Allah. So it really enhances and it elaborates and it teaches us the sacred nature of the relationship between husband and wife. So, again, we're talking about this idea of our households. If our households are in a stable position, and if our households are built on a mutual understanding, then inshallah, our dawah work will also be flourished and it will be easier for us to do. So what are the lessons we can learn from these surahs? That we should stop those aspects which may cause dispute in families very, very early on. Both of these stories, Allah intervened in story number 1. Okay, Allah told the Prophet ﷺ that the wife had told someone else. This came by revelation. So subhanAllah, Allah intervened. So we learn that before things escalate, we need to intervene very early on. And this is a lesson for couples as well, that if they feel in the first instance that they cannot solve a matter between themselves, they absolutely must go and seek help. They should not try. If they find that they cannot solve a problem amongst themselves, go to a counselor, go to somebody they trust. And as contrary to what our community says, that going to a counselor and all the taboos around the counseling, this is encouraged. So from very, very early on, there needs to be intervention if the husband and wife cannot settle matters. The family structure can remain strong if it is based on taqwa. So if there is mutual understanding, if there is God-fearing, if the couple are God-fearing, if they understand that Allah watches everything. Again, look, going back to story number 1, Allah could see everything that these wives were doing, right? Allah saw what was going on inside his household. And that reminds us that Allah watches us as well. And if we follow this structure, and if we follow this, then the family structure can remain very, very strong. And finally, we should show concern regarding our spouses. And that's back to the very first story I was telling you about the wife not liking something of the Prophet ﷺ from ayah number 1. We should show concern regarding our spouse and our children. There is no harm in trying to please our wife. That was not the moral of that ayah. It wasn't that, oh, you're making my life, your wife has a certain perfume, no, your wife doesn't like a certain perfume that you wear, and oh no, I'm not going to wear this perfume because, I am going to wear this perfume because Allah said not to make the permissible, impermissible, etc. That's not what the purpose is of that. The purpose of that ayah was to say that if in the situation, in the example of the Prophet ﷺ, he needs to be at comfort at home. That was the purpose, that he needs to be comfortable because of the task, the nature of the task that he was given. But we should show concern for our spouses and children. It's just out of courtesy. If, for example, your husband came in wearing some really odd smelling cologne, you are going to tell him that, oh, love, I don't really like that perfume that you're wearing. And it's not going to be taken as a big deal, hopefully. These are, that's showing regard to our spouse and our children, and hopefully your husband will change it. So it's a slightly different example that I'm giving you when it comes to the Prophet, the first ayah, when we were talking about how not to make the permissible impermissible. The context is very important there. It's when we are really interested in, the task of outreach. So let's look at the summary of our relationship with our family then. Keeping our family structure strong will enable us to carry out the wider mission Allah has given us. So that was from ayah number 1. Our home structure should be supportive and facilitate peace and harmony. But if we intend to, inshallah, make the intention and we want to do this outreach work, if we want to serve our community, then our home structure should be supportive of it, which doesn't mean that you go and do things without the consultation of your family. If you decide to take on a role, we should come home. We should tell our family that this is what I'm thinking. What do you guys think? And inshallah, if they agree and if they are supportive of that, then we are facilitating harmony and peace. If you have disputes in our family, this will have a ripple effect on the outreach work that we do. We talked extensively about that. And our family is the essential unit for any outreach work to take place. So every outreach work starts from the notion of family. If family is, alhamdulillah, at peace and harmony, then inshallah, everything else will also be at harmony and peace. And we will be able to carry out our mission effectively. So after a very, very long, I'd say, session about what we've been learning today with the different relationships, let's go back to our summary, inshallah. So the first thing we did was establishing the relationship with the Prophet ﷺ. So again, showing obedience to him, what does it mean to honor him? Once we've understood how to establish the relationship with the Prophet ﷺ, we have the tools to understand how to establish relationship with the society. Call for the Ummah to be united, call for the united Ummah to be helpers of the religion, call for the united Ummah to spend in the way of Allah and understand who our enemies are and what their qualities are. And finally, Allah tells us to come right back to the family unit, establishing relationship with our families. All outreach work begins with the essential family unit. The family unit must be strong and based on taqwa for outreach work to be successful. We should recognize a figure of authority in our community, and we should not make permissible impermissible. Okay? So that is our summary for today, alhamdulillah. So what is my ayah of the day? Alhamdulillah, I'm doing pretty good for time. I'm quite impressed with that. I thought I'd rush, but alhamdulillah, Allah's put barakah in my time. So my ayah of the day is from Surah Hadid. And this is one that I haven't actually touched upon. I'm going to do it now because it's such a beautiful ayah, and actually it's an eye opener. Allah here tells us, أَلَمْ يَأْنِ لِلَّذِينَ آمَنُوا أَن تَخْشَعَ قُلُوبُهُمْ لِذِكْرِ اللَّهِ وما نزل من الحق ولا يكونوا كالذين أوتوا الكتاب من قبل فطال عليهم الأمد فقست قلوبهم وكثير منهم فاسقون. Has the time not come for those who believe that their hearts should become humbly submissive at the remembrance of Allah and what has come down of the truth? And let them not be like those who were given the scripture before, and a long period passed over them, so their hearts hardened, and many of them defiantly disobedient. Allah is telling us, after all these days, and after you have come so far in reading the Quran, you are on like juz 27. Has the time not come for you to be submissive at the remembrance of Allah? Isn't it time for you to reflect? SubhanAllah, everyone, we've done this summer of the Quran. This is the last week. We've only got 3 more days after today. And Allah in Surah Hadid now asks us, has the time not come for you to reflect? And Allah is not talking to mankind. Allah is talking, has the time not come for those who believed? Allah is referring to the believers. Allah is referring to us. Has the time not come? You know, we've come so far. Is it not time for something to click in you? Is it, you know, have we forgotten? Have you read all of this for nothing? And Allah is still telling us, don't be like those whose hearts have hardened. You still have time. You still have another 3 juz. You still have time to read. You still have time to understand the message. If it has not clicked yet, inshallah, the hope is that you still go on before it does. Don't be like the people that were in the scripture before. A long period passed for them. They just read it routinely. The relationship with the Quran became artificial. The Quran was on their back like the donkeys, like the books on the back of the donkey. Has the time not come? So we too really need to reflect. We've been doing the summer of the Quran. Some of you guys have been doing more than the summer of the Quran, mashallah. Has that thing clicked? Have you really, truly been submissive at the remembrance of Allah? Have you really, truly understood your task in this dunya? Have you really, truly understood how to spend in the way of Allah? Have you say you believe, but have you really believed? So there's this element that Allah knows. Allah knows what's in the heart. He knows that the belief, He's addressing the believers. He's not even addressing the disbelievers. He's not addressing the kuffar in Makkah. He's not addressing the hypocrites. He's not addressing the Jews. He's addressing the believers. He knows that it has taken us so long to come. And even then, in the way you see that Allah's almost doubting, have you not believed? Really? You haven't believed? Has the time not come? So if there's one thing we should take away today, if our hearts have not clicked yet, today, make today the day where it does. We still have time. We still have time before we, in order for us to remove the artificial relationship we have with the Quran. We still have 3 more days, inshallah. We still have a week before Ramadan ends. We still have time. This ayah instills hope, but it gives us a sense of, oh, have we not believed yet? Have we not really understood? It gives us hope, but it gives us this element of doubt within ourselves. Are our hearts hardened? Have we got this artificial relationship with the Quran? So inshallah, that is something we need to really take heed of. That is something I would recommend all of us to go away today and think about. Has the time not come? Everything good has come from me. It is from Allah, and everything wrong that I said or anything that you have misunderstood, it is from my own self, and may Allah remove that from your memory. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta nastaghfiruka